Hi there, my name is Escher. My pronouns are he or they, and I'm a transmasculine gender fluid person. I've been on testosterone for about 4 years, and recently I got a comment from someone saying that they were struggling to decide whether or not they should transition. I just remember so vividly the struggle that I went through when I was deciding to transition, and just want to put your mind at ease for a second and say that A, there's no rush, and B, every single one of my trans friends has been through the same struggle. So you're not alone there. You know, the thing is, I cannot tell you whether or not you should transition or not. But what I can do is lay out some of the things you might want to consider when making that decision. One of the funny things about transition is that when we talk about it so vaguely, we each have our own sort of preconceived notion about what transition means, but the reality of it is that there are a million different ways to transition, and it's different for every single person. For example, you could transition socially to one group of friends and not another group of friends. You could transition just in your own mind and have that be something where you know who you are, but you don't really need to express it or share it with anyone else. You could start HRT, hormone replacement therapy. You could get a surgery, or 2, or 3. Literally, it can look a million different ways. So let's get into it. Should you transition or not? So first things first is thinking about mental health, okay? Mental health is a big word, and I guess what I mean by that is that when you transition socially, at least, there are going to be a lot of new stressors that show up in your life. You're gonna have to come out to people and explain things and, whatever. Knowing that there are going to be more stressors in your life, how do you currently handle stress? Do you have coping mechanisms for that? I know that for me personally, also if you hear a weird chewing sound, that's my dog. My dog is chilling on the bed, chewing a bone. So he's hanging out with us too. I know personally what I did was I actually was going to a therapist, and when I started going to that therapist, I said, hey, I think I'm trans, but I don't want to transition. I just want to cope with being trans, and how can you help me do that? And the thing is, after years of going to this therapist, something that she really, really helped me with was managing my stress and having healthier outlets for emotions that I was feeling. And eventually I decided, I want to transition. This is something that I want. And the reason I didn't want to was because I just didn't think I could. I didn't think that I could handle it. I couldn't handle the stress involved with sharing this with other people. I definitely recommend, if you don't have a therapist, finding one. And not just any therapist, though. I've had many really bad therapists in my life, and when you have a good one, somebody that you can tell genuinely has your best interests in mind, and someone that is letting you sort of lead. Oh my god, Arrow. He's having fun over here. Someone that is educated about trans issues and can sort of give you a fuller perspective on that. I know it can be harder in some areas of the country, but yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later. So number 2 is a social support system. So I think social support systems are absolutely just super helpful for having a happy, healthy life, just whether you're trans or not. But particularly when you're trans, having a support system of someone to lean on when things feel really hard is super important. Here's a question for you, okay? Who do you spend the most time with right now? Who would you describe as your social support system right now? How do those folks handle other kind of queer issues? How do they think about queerness? Do you talk about it at all? How do they respond when you talk about other trans people? How do they respond when you kind of fuck with gender a little bit? If you paint your nails, or if you kind of dress in a masculine outfit one day, how do they respond to that? And if you find that they are really enthusiastically excited about that, then sweet, this might be a good person that you can lean on and can be in your social support network. One really important thing about support systems for me is not only does this person know you really well, but they also allow you to change and kind of like invite the changes that are going to come along with who you are, whether it's related to transition or not. Like maybe you have a hobby that you love to play basketball, and like one day you kind of realize like, I'm actually not that into basketball, I'm kind of getting into soccer now. Like how are your friends with you adapting and changing, and finding someone that can kind of be that for you, like be excited and enthusiastic about just like you discovering new things that you're excited about. Like that's a really good support system. I will say that particularly when talking about transition, connecting with and finding other trans people is, for me, absolutely essential. And here's why. Your cis friends, your parents, whatever, your siblings, whoever it is that you might describe as your support system now, can absolutely give you support. However, they can't tell you what it's like to transition, and they can't tell you about some of the emotional stuff that happens during transition. And being able to connect with other trans people and ask questions and like be able to sort of connect on that level, like as trans people or potential trans people, whatever it is, you get an insight that you just can't get from other cis people. All that said, those connections you can really make. You can make them online. If you don't know anyone who's trans in your town, there are also a lot of trans support groups that happen locally. And especially now with COVID restrictions lifting, maybe there's one in your area that you can try to attend and see how it feels. Like you don't even have to go there and talk. You can just go there and listen. And hey, maybe you'll meet a friend. That's what happened to me. The very first trans person that I ever met, I met at a support group. My therapist recommended I go, and I was like, nah, for weeks. And then finally I was like, you know what? This is on my mind. I'm struggling with it. Like, I'm just gonna go. And I went and I met one of my best friends. I performed at his wedding a couple of years ago, before COVID. And literally, like, it was really life-changing to hear his experience. He was like 4 or 5 months on T at the time, and I was like still a baby tran, like nah, but it was really great to have his support through everything as well. So number 3, the next thing to consider are finances. How fun. Love talking about money. But yeah, it is a reality that when you transition, there's sort of new financial things you have to be aware of. So maybe that means time. Okay, even just like the process of like discovering transness and taking the time out of your life to like have these conversations, like those, time is money, they say, and in reality, like it can be distracting from jobs or other things that you might, be doing at the time. So just considering that like that is something that could affect your finances. But next, thinking about something like HRT or surgeries, those things cost money. And like, do you have health insurance? What's sort of your financial situation? Are you financially independent? Like you make your own money and you live off of that? Or like, are you dependent on somebody else for housing or for food or for money at all? And if you are, it's sort of a tricky situation where like you transitioning could risk some of that security that you have, and are you ready to take that risk? Your situation is a unique one, so like I can't really speak to it, but what I can say is that thinking about finances as like a factor in transition is important. I mean, think about this, right? Also, say you have been trying to fit into the mold of a girl for how many years, and like you decide, you know what, I want to transition, and like this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. All of a sudden, like you gotta buy some new clothes, boy. And if you if you're trans femme and like you decide like, I want to transition and I really want to get in touch with like my femme side, like I really want to do that, you got to get some dresses, girl. But and maybe you're non-binary and like you've been trying to fit into some other mold, like, and you want to do something else, you got to get some new what's a good non-binary, whatever, you got to get some new socks. Non-binary looks like a million different things, so I don't even know what to say. You got to get some new socks, okay? But yeah, thinking about finances is important, and just making sure that like you aren't putting yourself or your safety at risk by coming out at a time when you're not ready. That said, like, I knew I was trans. I had thoughts of transness back when I was in high school, and I was living with my parents who are really Catholic and not supportive. And if I were to come out back then, could have been really disastrous for me. But I waited, and I wasn't in the place either. Like, I had to do a lot of other work on myself. But the point is that if you can't do it right now, there are things that you can do that don't necessarily mean some kind of full, quote unquote, full on transition. And it's not going to risk your health and safety. So you can wait. And that honestly really sucks that that is the case for some of us. But the thing is, like, when you have a support system, like, you can make it through that. Absolutely. So number 4 is, I was going to save this for later, but it just seemed like the right time, talking about baby steps. So when I first started my transition, I first started binding, and like the first time I bound my chest, it felt so good, and I was like, it was something I could take on and off, and no one even knew that I bought a binder. Like, I was like dating someone very seriously, and I did it secretly because I had a lot of internalized stuff to deal with. But I bought that binder, and it felt like really, really good. And the next thing I did was I cut my hair, and like, people being perceived as girls can cut their hair, and it doesn't really mean anything. People might think that you're gay or something, I don't know, but like, you know, you can sort of like style your hair different, or do these sort of like non-committal gender fuckery that gives you the opportunity to see, how does this feel when I start to embody this gender that I feel like I am? You could get some clothes that like feel gender affirming to you, and see how that feels on an emotional level to you when you do it. Like, these are all kind of little steps that you can take, and baby steps are so important. It was really important because the thing is, like, the concept of HRT, for example, it felt like such a big thing, and it is, you know, in some ways, but like, there was no possible way that I could have known that HRT was right for me. And actually, when I started, I didn't know with 100% certainty that it was right for me. I just knew that every single step that I took to embody that sort of masculine gender felt good. It felt great. And I knew that things weren't really working the way they were for me, so this was something I was willing to try. And the thing is, so for example, I have a lot of trans friends who started transitioning, went on HRT, and then stopped. They did a little bit of HRT and then stopped, and some of them went back on, some of them didn't, but the reality is that you can sort of shape this transition to be whatever you want it to be. You know, this concept of like all or nothing, it's meaningless in gender. What even is gender anyway? Next is location. So thinking about where you live, and how does like the local municipality think about and respond to transgender issues. I think like location can shape a lot about like the types of things you have access to, and also it can shape certain risks that you might face. Like, are you going to have housing insecurity if you transition? Are landlords going to discriminate against you because you are trans? Are you going to be able to land the job that you really want because you're trans in your town? There's sort of these weird things related to location that can really affect the way your transition shows up. And maybe you live in a place where like being trans is not cool at all, and you might decide that like, well, you know what, like, this is where I want to live though, and I'm either gonna have to like take on that risk myself, or just like, you know, keep my transition to like a more social situation with my friends. Like, that's totally cool too, but it's all like part of the decision making process. And for me, I was lucky enough to live in like the Northeast US, so like I lived in Boston when I first started transitioning, and then I right away moved to New York and New York City. These areas are like really, municipally speaking at least, protect trans people. So it might even be worth the type of thing where you're like, I'm not really like committed to staying where I am, and I know that if I go somewhere else, I'm gonna have a much smoother time navigating all this stuff. Like, that might be something worth considering. So the last thing is education, and I think that education is one of the most important things to finding happiness in your transition, because the thing is, like, think about whatever transition means to you. What are your expectations around what that means and what that's going to look like? If you're not educated on it, it can leave you feeling kind of crappy about, like, oh, I did this thing and it came out a different way that I wanted it to. Like, for example, if you want to start testosterone, you want to start HRT, and you want like all of the muscles that go along with testosterone, but you don't like body hair at all, like, how are you going to feel if you get body hair? Or like, what if you start HRT and you gain some weight? Like, how is that going to make you feel? And like, what are your sort of like expectations around what this kind of change in your body means for you and how it presents itself? For better or worse, with a lot of things regarding like HRT, you don't really get to pick and choose like what traits you get and what traits you don't. It's kind of based on your genes, and having like a full picture of like, what are the risks associated with this and what are the side effects of things like this. It's all super important to educate yourself on. And secondly, another reason why it's like really important to be educated is that like, people are going to ask you questions. Like, the people you know in your life who don't know another trans person, they're going to ask you questions. What are you going to say when someone says to you, well, isn't gender just a construct? So if it's just a construct, then why do you need to transition in the first place? How are you going to answer that question if you haven't done the research, if you're not educated about like trans topic stuff, like trans 101 kind of stuff? As a part of that education process, hopefully it will give you some more clarity. And if you haven't dealt with like the emotional side of things yet, it might not give you any clarity at all. But if you have, then maybe it will. So just to recap, some of the important kind of areas to make considerations when you are deciding whether or not to transition are your mental health, your social support system, your financial situation, how baby steps feel, your location, and finally, education. I really, really hope that you know that you don't have to rush, and that everybody kind of deals with these struggles when they're deciding whether or not they want to transition. If you have transitioned yourself, I would love for you to like comment down below, just saying like, how did you kind of make the decision to transition? Because everybody has a different story, and I'd love to hear that, and I'm sure it'd be super helpful for those who have not decided yet. And if you are in that decision-making phase, you think you might be trans, you're not really sure what to do with that, what are some baby steps that you can do right now that are non-committal that you can use to sort of test the waters? Or what baby steps have you taken to sort of test those waters a little bit? Thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm Escher, and I'm sending you so much love. I want you to know that no matter where you are on this journey, you are made of the same stuff as stars, and you are so much more incredible than you could ever even imagine. Yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.